For 87 years, humanity had a seat at the galactic table. The problem? It was next to the boiler by the service entrance. That was us. And that was Ambassador Elena Vasquez. She was about to teach the whole galaxy why you never, ever underestimate the little guy. Stick around, because you're not going to believe what happens when they finally push her too far. From their gilded thrones high above, the Lorathi looked down on everyone, their silver skin gleaming with arrogance. Below them, the Keth floated in their personal water tanks, followed by a dozen other species, all ranked miles ahead of humanity. Elena didn't care about the cheap seats, she cared about the disrespect. The council recognizes the delegate from Earth, a Lorathi official droned, his voice so bored he might as well have been ordering office supplies. You may speak. Elena didn't flinch. She hit a button, and the air filled with images of horror, skyscrapers collapsing into fire, parents running with children in their arms, and streets littered with the fallen. Over the last 4 months, she said, her voice like steel, Vorkath pirates have wiped 3 human colonies off the map. Nexus Prime, Haven's Rest, New Bangalore, she said their names like a eulogy. That's a total of 12 million souls. We have confirmed 47,000 dead so far, and the count is climbing every hour. The words hung in the vast hall. A few delegates looked uncomfortable, but most just looked impatient. Each time, she pressed on, we sent a distress call to the Council's defense fleet, and each time they arrived between 6 and 9 days too late. By then, the pirates were long gone, along with our people and everything we owned. The minister replied without a hint of emotion. The fleet has many duties. Response times are based on strategic importance. Strategic importance, Elena repeated, letting the words poison the air. That's odd. Because when your mining station had a pirate problem last year, the fleet got there in 14 hours. When a Keth freighter was attacked, they made it in 11. But when human worlds are burning, our importance suddenly drops to 0. A ripple of whispers went through the room. You just didn't speak to the Lorathi like that, especially not if you were from a species they considered insignificant. But Elena was done being polite. We want an explanation, she demanded, and we are formally requesting that defense ships be sent to our 4th colony, Esperanza. Our intelligence says the raiders are headed there next. The minister, a smug creature named Selton, actually leaned back and smirked, like a parent about to explain gravity to a toddler. Ambassador, these raiders are a fact of life in the outer systems. All species must be self-sufficient. The Council provides support, but we can't fight every battle for you. Perhaps if humanity spent more on its own military instead of asking for handouts. A cold fire ignited in Elena's gut. We have paid our council taxes in full for 87 years, she shot back. We've sent our soldiers to die keeping your peace. Our engineers built the communication system you're using right now. Our doctors have served on your medical ships, saving lives all across this galaxy. We have done everything this council has ever asked. And you were rewarded with a seat at the table, Selton said, his voice practically dripping with disdain. That does not entitle you to the galaxy's entire fleet as your personal bodyguards. Sometimes a young species must suffer. It builds character. A few of the other ambassadors actually chuckled. The Droxy delegates started making a series of clicks, their version of laughter. They found this amusing. Elena waited for them to finish. Esperanza is home to 2 million people. They have children. The pirates will be there in 15 days. We are begging you. Your request will be considered, Selton said with a dismissive wave. A committee will be formed to assess the threat. You should have a formal decision within 60 cycles. 60 cycles, almost 70 days. Esperanza would be a graveyard by then. Elena looked across the hall at the faces of species that humans had fought beside, healed, and died for. She thought of the human engineers who fixed their broken stations, and the human marines who fell protecting their worlds. It was all for nothing. It never mattered. I see, Elena said, her voice now dangerously quiet. With a slow, deliberate movement, she reached for the council emblem on her jacket, a metal pin that was supposed to represent galactic unity, a family. She unclipped it and gently placed it on the podium in front of her. What is the meaning of this? Selton demanded, his smug expression finally cracking with a hint of confusion. I'm doing what my people should have done a long time ago, Elelena replied, standing taller than ever. On behalf of the United Earth government and every human being alive, I'm formally announcing our immediate and total withdrawal from the Galactic Council. The chamber fell completely silent. And then came the laughter, louder this time, full of ridicule. Withdrawal? The Draxi ambassador clicked. And go where? Do what? You're a tiny species on the edge of nowhere. You won't survive without us. We'll manage, Elelena said calmly. You'll come crawling back in under a year, begging us to let you in, Selton sneered. And maybe we'll think about it after you've learned some respect. Elelena just picked up her data pad and started to walk away. But at the edge of the stage, she stopped and glanced back at the laughing crowd. They were already turning away from her, dismissing her as a minor inconvenience that had been handled. You will all remember this day, she said. She didn't shout, but her voice cut through the noise like a knife, and a few of them turned back to her. I just hope you don't remember it with regret. Is that a threat? Selton scoffed. From a species that can't even defend itself? No, not a threat, Elelena said, her eyes sweeping across their arrogant faces. It's a fact. You never cared enough to see who we really are. You never understood what we were capable of. Maybe that's our fault. We assumed you wanted friends, not just servants. She turned her back on them for the last time and walked out. As the giant doors slid open, she added one last thing over her shoulder. Goodbye, Minister. Goodbye, everyone. I sincerely hope you never need the help you just denied us. The doors hissed shut behind her. Inside, the council got back to business, having already forgotten about the little species that just threw a fit. Their leaving meant nothing. It wouldn't change a thing. At least, that's what they thought. As Elelena walked through the station's main hall, she felt the eyes on her, some filled with pity, most with scorn. When she got back to the human embassy, her staff was already packing. They knew this was a possibility. Is it done? Her top aide, David, asked her. It's done. And their reaction? A small, bitter smile touched Elelena's lips. They laughed. David nodded slowly. They won't be laughing for long. No, Elelena agreed, looking out the window at the incredible galactic station that humanity had poured its blood and sweat into building. They won't. Not a single one of them had a clue what was coming. They had no idea how many of their essential systems were run by human engineers, how many of their trade routes were protected by human intelligence analysts, how many of their greatest enemies were kept at bay by human technology. They were about to get a rude awakening. The galaxy was about to find out that humanity was through being its doormat. Elelena opened a secure channel to Earth Command. This is Ambassador Vasquez, authorization Omega-7. The Council said no. Now, it's our turn to answer. Execute Protocol Sunrise. The reply came back instantly. Protocol Sunrise is a go. Welcome home, Ambassador. Let's get started. Elelena cut the connection. The galaxy kept spinning, completely unaware that its future had just been fundamentally altered. The arrogant delegates in that chamber didn't know it yet, but their era of easy living was over. It all started when one woman took off a pin, and it was going to end in a very, very long silence. For the first 3 months, nothing happened. The Council congratulated itself on getting rid of the annoying humans. Then, the cracks started to show, not all at once, but slowly, like a disease. The Galactic Communication Network, which had been secretly maintained and updated by human programmers for decades, started to fail. Supply ships started disappearing. A critical vaccine headed for a Keth planet never arrived, and the Vorkath pirates, who used to only be bold enough to hit human colonies, suddenly sacked a Larathi luxury liner. The galaxy was learning a hard lesson. The quiet, helpful species they treated like the hired help was actually the one who'd built the entire house, and they had just walked out with the blueprints. What happens when this galaxy's most important employees all quit on the same day? You're about to find out, and believe me, it gets messy. So stick around to see how this whole thing implodes. It all started with a number that made no sense, Governor Keithmar was looking at the monthly food import logs, and his brain just couldn't process it. Shipments were down 30%. He immediately got his logistics chief on the line. "This is a typo," he snapped. "Run the numbers again." The chief did, his face pale on the view screen. The numbers didn't budge. "How is that even possible?" Keithmar yelled. "Our farm worlds are hitting all their targets." The chief swallowed hard. "It's not a production problem, Governor. It's a delivery problem. It turns out 40% of our food was being shipped through routes run by humans. They took the dangerous jobs our own fleets wouldn't touch. Their prices were better, and they were never, ever late." "So hire someone else," Keithmar ordered. "We're trying, sir. The Draxi want to charge us triple. The Vaughn won't go near the Nebula corridor, and the Mathari ships are just too slow. We already have food riots breaking out on 7 of the outer worlds." Keithmar just stared at the screen. 40%. A 40% hole in their supply chain, and nobody had even noticed until it was too late. "Fix it," he growled. It was a complete disaster. The minister practically ran from the room, but he had no solution. Nobody did. The humans had spent 80 years building those trade routes from scratch. You can't just replace that overnight. And on the other side of the galaxy, the Kathvari were facing their own private apocalypse. Their famous communication network, the pride of the Council, was starting to fall apart. This wasn't just any network. It connected every major species across 1,000 light-years, turning messages that once took months into instant communication. It was the backbone of their entire civilization. And almost no one knew that humans had quietly designed and built every single relay station. Technician Val floated in his water sphere, watching a tidal wave of error codes he had no idea how to fix. 3 main relays had just gone dark in 1 week. The backup systems were screaming. If one more station went down, whole chunks of the galaxy would be cut off completely. "Can you get them back online?" asked Director Melith, her tentacles tied in anxious knots. "We can try," Val gurgled, "but the quantum alignment systems, that's all human tech. We have the basic manuals, but for a system-wide failure like this," he trailed off, letting the silence do the talking. "We never bothered to learn how it really worked," Melith finished for him, the horrifying truth sinking in. "No," Val said softly. "We never thought we'd have to." That same story was playing out all over Council space. The humans had been everywhere, doing a little bit of everything, and nobody had ever paid them any mind. They were like the background radiation of the universe, essential but completely invisible. Now they were gone. And on the border worlds, the Vorkath pirates were starting to notice. Captain Thasan of the Council Defense Fleet got a frantic distress call from a remote outpost. A pirate raiding party had hit a civilian ship carrying 40 passengers, mostly Draxi families. "Get us to Ker 5 now," she ordered. But even at top speed, her ship was days away, and everyone knew that 3 days was an eternity in deep space. "Captain," her communications officer said, his voice low. "Back when the humans were part of the Council, their patrol ships covered this whole sector. They could have been here in 4 to 6 hours. "I'm aware of that," Thasan said, her voice like ice. "Should we maybe send them a message?" Thasan just shook her head, her face a mask of bitter pride. "Humanity left the Council. They're not answering our calls." The officer hesitated. "But the people on that transport—" "I know," she snapped, the frustration boiling over. "I know." They got to Ker 5 3 days later. The transport was a wreck, floating silently, its hull ripped open. There were no survivors. It was the 3rd attack like this in a month. Before the humans left, a raid this bold was unthinkable. It was like the pirates had always been scared of something out there in the dark. Now they weren't scared anymore. No one was saying it out loud, but everyone was thinking it. Back at the Grand Assembly, the Council gathered to argue about the growing chaos. Minister Selen tried to put a positive spin on it. "These are merely growing pains," he announced grandly. "We became too reliant on human labor. This is an opportunity to become self-sufficient. It will make us stronger." "Stronger?" Ambassador Thexelar of the Cuthvari rose from his sphere. My people's communication grid is on the verge of total collapse. We've already lost contact with 3 colonies. How long until that gets fixed? Celine didn't have an answer. The humans are the only ones who understand that system, Thexelar pushed. Then learn it, Celine shot back. It took the humans 80 years to build that network. We don't have 80 years. Well, Celine said with a dismissive flick of his hand, perhaps you should have learned from them instead of just taking their charity. The humans are gone. We will move on. Will we? The Draxi ambassador cut in, his mandibles clicking nervously. My latest numbers show that profits are crashing in every sector. The human freighters weren't just cheap, they were dependable. They flew the dangerous routes everyone else was too scared to take. They fixed problems for us before we even knew we had them, he continued. That's enough. Celine's scales turned a deep shade of angry red. I will not listen to this whining for a species that walked out on us. They chose to leave. Let them deal with the consequences. We are the Council. We ran this galaxy for 10,000 years before humans figured out how to fly to their own moon. We will run it for 10,000 more. The meeting ended like all the others, with lots of shouting and zero solutions. But in the weeks that followed, a few quiet government analysts started digging into old records, trying to figure out what exactly humanity had been doing all this time. What they found was mind-blowing. The Larathi Intelligence Agency found that human observer ships had secretly been the main part of the early warning system protecting the core worlds. For decades, humanity had taken the jobs nobody else wanted, boring, lonely patrols in the empty voids between stars. The other species thought they were just eager newcomers trying to earn a place. The real story was much bigger. On those patrols, human ships had quietly intercepted and turned back 7 different invasion fleets from outside the galaxy. They did it with smart diplomacy, back-channel deals, and quiet threats the Council never even heard about. They never wrote a report. They never asked for a thank you. But why? The intelligence director stammered, looking at the declassified files. Why would they keep something like this a secret? His top analyst had no idea. Nobody did. Across a dozen planets, the same jaw-dropping realization was sinking in. The humans hadn't just been helping out. They were the invisible glue holding the whole galaxy together. Human engineers were the ones secretly patching their failing power grids. Human doctors were the ones running clinics on fringe worlds their own governments had forgotten about. Human teachers were running schools for kids of all species. It was never part of a treaty. The humans just saw something that needed to be done, and they did it. All they ever asked for was to be treated like equals. And for all of that, the Council had given them the worst seats in the assembly hall and ignored them at every turn. 3 months after humanity left, Ambassador Thexelar called an emergency meeting. We have to ask them to come back, he said bluntly. Selin actually laughed out loud. Come back? After they abandoned us? We should be punishing them, not begging them. They didn't abandon us, Thexelar argued. Their ambassador simply said we would remember this day. Was that a threat? Or was it a warning from someone who saw the cliff we were about to walk off? Thexelar looked exhausted. Minister, I've spent the last month looking at how much we relied on them. The truth is, if this continues, our entire galactic society could collapse within a year. You're exaggerating. I wish I was, Thexelar said. Celan just waved his hand. The humans will come crawling back. They need us more than we need them. They're a tiny species with no real power. Once they get tired of their little tantrum, they'll be begging us to take them back. And what if they don't? Thexelar asked quietly. Then they will fade into history. But as Celan spoke, something was happening out in human space. Fleets were moving, new star bases were coming online, and messages were flying along secret networks the Council had no idea existed. Humanity wasn't crawling back. They weren't fading away. They were building something new. And pretty soon, The whole galaxy was going to get an invitation, Model T. Imagine being stabbed in the back by the very people you swore to protect. Deep inside a bunker carved into the Swiss Alps, humanity's leaders were dealing with exactly that. Admiral Chen Wei laid out the grim reality. "Our entire navy is ready," he said, his voice tight. "Every ship, every crew, we can go on 72 hours' notice." President Okonjo stared at the holographic map, her face a mask of stone. And the council? How long until their little paradise crumbles? The admiral didn't hesitate. 6 months until their economy implodes, 1 year until their governments fall apart, and that's if the Dreth don't make a move first. Someone in the back asked, "The Dreth?" "Oh, they're watching," Chen said. "They see the council bleeding out, and they're getting hungry. They always knew who the real power was, even if the council was too arrogant to see it." If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, you know how this feels. Stick around to see what happens when the quiet kid in the corner finally decides they've had enough. Now that we're out of the picture, they see an opening, the admiral continued. They see the council getting weaker by the day, and they're starting to circle. President Okonjo looked at the faces around the table, the leaders of the human race. Every single one of them was bone-tired, their hearts broken. For 87 years, they had played by the rules, trying to be good galactic neighbors, just hoping for a seat at the table. That hope was ash now. "We gave them everything," she whispered, her voice cracking. "We shared our science. We fought their wars. We just wanted a little respect." "I know," Admiral Chen said softly. "But respect was the one thing they were never going to give us." The president's eyes hardened, her voice turning to ice. "Then we have no choice. Continue the preparations. It's time this galaxy learned a lesson about who we really are." Okonjo gazed at the image of Earth, a brilliant blue marble hanging in the blackness. "We're still going to save them," she said, a quiet fire in her voice, "because that's who we are." And with that, the meeting was over. The work went on. But out in the cold, silent void, something was stirring. Something that had been put to sleep for nearly a century while humanity tried to be the galaxy's helpful, harmless little brother. The galaxy was about to find out what happens when that something wakes up. Just 8 months after humanity walked away, the galaxy caught fire. It came without warning. 300 Vorkath warships tore a hole in space-time right over the colonies of Larathi Prime. There were no demands, no negotiations. They just started burning worlds. From his command deck, Governor Keithmar watched the horror on his tactical displays. One by one, the lights representing his colonies just went out. Millions of his people erased in minutes, and he was completely helpless. "Where is our defense fleet?" he roared. "They're on their way, Governor," his aide stammered. "But the Vorkath are too fast. They'll be gone before our ships even get here." "How did this happen? We should have seen this coming." "The early warning net, sir." The aide's voice dropped to a terrified whisper. "It ran on the human patrol grid, the one that's not there anymore." A cold dread washed over Keithmar, so heavy he could barely breathe. The humans. It was all because of the humans. For 8 solid months, the council had been lying to itself, insisting everything was fine. They told everyone humanity was never that important. Every new problem was just a minor hiccup they could easily solve. They truly believed the galaxy didn't need one tiny species from some forgotten corner of space. They were dead wrong. By the time the Council Defense Fleet finally arrived in the Larathi system, they were 18 hours too late. The Vorkath had vanished, taking millions of Larathi as slaves and leaving behind the smoking ruins of cities that had stood for 1,000 years. It was the single worst attack in galactic history, and it was just the beginning. In the weeks that followed, the Vorkath got bolder, raiding the Kathvari shipping lanes. They hit Draxi mining outposts. They struck deep inside territory that had been considered completely safe for generations. The Council scrambled its fleets to push back, but something was fundamentally broken. Their ships couldn't coordinate. Orders were being lost. Entire squadrons were sent to the wrong star systems. The mightiest military in the galaxy, the force that had kept the peace for a millennium, was suddenly flailing around like a blind giant, and Admiral Than knew exactly why. She had locked herself away for months, digging through ancient archives, piecing together a truth no one wanted to hear. Humanity wasn't just a member of our fleet, she told the Council in a panicked emergency session. They were our central nervous system. For decades, their comms officers served on our ships. We thought they were just trainees. We were wrong. They were the ones making it all work. They wrote the software that let a Draxi ship talk to a Cathvari cruiser. They mediated disputes between commanders whose tactics were completely alien to each other. They were the thread holding our entire defense network together. That's absurd, Minister Selton sneered. Our fleet is the greatest in history. We don't need a pack of primitives to function. Then you explain it, Admiral Than shot back. Explain why we've lost every single engagement since they left. Explain why our response time has doubled. Explain why 3 of our own capital ships opened fire on each other last week because of a simple miscommunication. Selton had no answer. None of them did. But the military collapse wasn't even the worst news. The truly terrifying reports were coming from the border. The Dreth hegemony was on the move. The Dreth were an ancient, brutal empire, far older than the Council, and they had been a constant threat for thousands of years. But for the last century, they'd been eerily quiet, staying behind their borders as if they were afraid of something. Now, whatever had been holding them back was gone. Intelligence Director Voss stood before the Council, his face pale. The Dreth are gathering massive fleets along our entire border. Our analysts believe they're preparing for a full-scale invasion. When? Selton demanded. We don't know. Soon. It feels like they're waiting for something. Waiting for what? Voss took a slow, heavy breath. We think they're waiting for one last piece of confirmation that the humans aren't coming back to stop them. The chamber fell silent. Selton's scales faded to a sickly pale gray. Why would the Dreth possibly care about humanity? He whispered. They're a minor species. Everyone knows that. Everyone thought that, Voss corrected him, his voice grim. But I've been reviewing classified intelligence files from the last 100 years, and the story they tell is different. He activated a hologram, filling the room with top-secret documents that had been buried for generations, documents that rewrote everything they thought they knew. 17 years ago, the Dreth gathered an invasion force of 2,000 warships. They were poised to strike at the Council's core worlds, but that invasion never came. I remember, Selton said. Our diplomats negotiated a brilliant treaty. No, Voss said, his voice flat and cold. The Dreth High Command received one private message from the planet Earth. The contents are still a mystery, even to us. But here's what we know. Within 24 hours of receiving that message, the entire Dreth fleet turned around and went home. The invasion was called off. And for 17 years, the Dreth haven't made a single hostile move. Until now. Until humanity left. Ambassador Thexler finished, his voice heavy. The Dreth were never afraid of us. They were afraid of the humans. They're just checking to see if the guard dog is really gone before they jump the fence. For 3 days, the Council screamed at each other, debating useless strategies and dead-end alliances. But it was all for show. There was only one thing they could do, and every single one of them knew it. They had to beg the humans to come back. Ambassador Thexler was chosen for the humiliating mission. He'd always been one of the few who argued for treating humanity with respect, and they trusted him. He traveled to Earth with a huge delegation in tow. They brought formal apologies, promises of sweeping reforms, and offers of full partnership on the Council. Ambassador Elena Vasquez met them in Geneva, in the very same hall where humans had first welcomed the Council to their world nearly 100 years earlier. She wasn't the woman Thexler remembered. She looked tired, but beneath it was a core of unbreakable steel, the look of someone who has made an impossible choice and has finally found peace with it. Ambassador Thexelar, she said with a simple nod, it's good to see you. And you, Ambassador Vasquez, he replied. I only wish we had stood with you when it counted. Me too, she said, her voice devoid of pity. They sat across from each other at a plain wooden table, the fate of the galaxy resting between them. It wasn't a fancy throne room or some grand ceremony. It was just two diplomats, with the entire weight of galactic history pressing down on them. You already know why I'm here, Ambassador Thexelar said, his voice heavy. I do. The ambassador pressed on. The Council has authorized me to offer humanity full membership with equal voting rights. You'll get a permanent seat on the High Council. The Council fleet will offer full protection to all your colonies, and your species will be officially named a founding partner in a new galactic union. Elena just listened, her face a perfect mask. When he finished, she let the silence stretch for what felt like an eternity. That is an extremely generous offer, she finally replied. But I'm afraid the answer is no. The ambassador was stunned. Ambassador, you can't, he pleaded. The Dreth are about to invade. The Vorkath are tearing our systems to shreds. Our own fleet is useless without your people. The Council is about to completely collapse. And Elena just said, I know. Then why won't you help us now? He asked, his voice cracking. Elena stood and walked to the massive window. Outside, the majestic mountains of Earth reached for a perfect blue sky. You could hear kids laughing in a park below, and birds singing in trees that were centuries old. When the Vorkath were butchering my people on our own worlds, we came to you, she said, her voice quiet but sharp as shattered glass. We didn't come with demands. We didn't threaten you. We begged you for help, the way partners are supposed to. But the Council, you just laughed. Minister Selen actually had the nerve to say that younger species have to learn to solve their own problems. The ambassador looked away in shame. He was wrong. We see that now. Oh, you see it now, she said, turning to face him. You only see it because the fire is finally burning down your own front door. For 87 years, we were your most loyal partners. We protected you in ways you never even knew. We supported you in ways you never even bothered to thank us for. And we never asked for a single thing in return, except for a little bit of respect. I know, he said, his many eyes filled with regret. I tried to tell them. Yes, you did. She cut in, acknowledging his effort. You were one of the few good ones. But the Council, they decided we were beneath them. You took every single gift we offered and just threw contempt right back in our faces. What can we do to make this right? He begged. Elena sat back down, her voice becoming soft but as strong as steel. Nothing. There is absolutely nothing you can do. We're not angry with you, Ambassador. This isn't about getting even. We don't need you to tell us we're good enough anymore. We don't need your approval. We wasted 87 years hoping you would finally see our value. We are done hoping. The ambassador was desperate. So you're just going to let the entire galaxy burn? Billions of people are going to die. Elena offered him a small, sad smile. I never said that. When the real threat arrives, when the time is right, humanity will act. But we will do it our way, not as your servants. We will help because it's the right thing to do, not because you finally decided we deserve to be treated like people. He leaned forward, desperate for a lifeline. What are you talking about? What is humanity planning? You'll see, she said. Very soon. For now, tell your council to get ready for the Dreth, and do what you can for your own people. They thought humanity was just a weak, insignificant species. They were about to learn a lesson they would never, ever forget. What do you do when all hope seems lost? The human representative had left Ambassador Thexelar with a cryptic piece of advice. Look to the stars. After that confusing meeting, he went straight back to the council chambers. When he told Minister Selen that he'd failed, the minister absolutely lost it. She said no to everything? To everything? Selen's scales were practically vibrating with rage. Those arrogant apes, they'd rather sit back and watch the galaxy burn than swallow their pride and help us. But Thexelar quietly disagreed. That's not what she said. She said they would act when the real crisis was here, and she told us to look to the stars. Selin just scoffed, calling it useless poetry. But Thexelar had seen something in Elena's eyes. It wasn't anger, and it wasn't a thirst for revenge. It was something that almost looked like pity, as if she felt sorry for them. 4 months later, the Dreth arrived. They poured across the border with 10,000 ships, a black tide of pure destruction. Their ships were ancient and terrifying, built for nothing but war by a species that had known nothing but conflict for 50,000 years. Every single one of their ships was bigger than the Council's largest battleship, and they were armed with weapons that could turn a planet to dust. The Council's defense fleet met them near the Charon Nebula. It was 3,000 ships against 10,000. The commanders knew it was a suicide mission, but they had no choice. If the Dreth broke through their line, the core worlds were done for. Admiral Thesson was in command, and she had spent 4 agonizing months trying to prepare, drilling her crews and patching the massive communication gaps left behind when the humans left. It was nowhere near enough. She knew it was hopeless, but she had to try. "All ships engage," she ordered, her voice like stone. "Make them bleed for every single inch." For 6 hours, the battle was a hurricane of fire and light. The Council fleet fought with unbelievable bravery and even managed to destroy over 1,000 Dreth ships. But for every one they took down, they lost 3 of their own. The communication problems they'd been struggling with for a year became an absolute nightmare. Ships were falling out of formation, critical orders were lost in static, and in the chaos, friendly ships started firing on each other. When the explosions finally died down, the Council fleet was gone. Less than 500 ships survived. From her ruined bridge, Admiral Thesson watched the Dreth Armada continue its unstoppable advance. "Signal the Council," she whispered. "Tell them we have failed. Tell them to start the evacuation of the core worlds." Her communications officer was sobbing as she sent the final, devastating message. Back in the Grand Assembly Hall, absolute chaos erupted. Delegates were screaming at each other. Some were demanding surrender. Others were calling for a pointless, suicidal last stand. Minister Selene tried to restore order, but you couldn't hear him over the sounds of pure terror. "We're doomed," the Draxi ambassador wailed. "The Dreth will turn us all into slaves." Then someone whispered, "What about the humans?" Another representative immediately shot back, "The humans! They hate us. They'll probably just grab some popcorn and watch us all burn." Through all of the chaos, Ambassador Thexelar just floated silently in his sphere, remembering Elena's last words. "When everything seems lost, look to the stars." And so he looked. The first reports began to trickle in from the few listening posts that were still working on the border. Strange ships were appearing. At first, there were just a few hundred, but then there were thousands. All of them were coming from the direction of human space. "Are they our ships?" someone asked, a tiny flicker of hope in their voice. "No," the officer replied, her voice filled with total awe. "Their energy signatures don't match anything in our entire database. They're bigger than anything we have ever seen." The giant hologram in the center of the hall lit up, showing the approaching fleet. A wave of stunned silence washed over the entire room. These ships weren't just big, they were colossal. The smallest of them was larger than the Council's most powerful warship. The biggest was the size of a small moon. They moved in perfect silent formation, thousands of ships gliding through space as if they were one. Their hulls were made of a strange, shining metal, and they were covered with terrifying weapon systems. And on the side of every single ship was a simple, unmistakable symbol, the blue and green marble of planet Earth. "That's impossible," Minister Selene whispered, his voice trembling uncontrollably. "That is completely and utterly impossible." A communication request lit up every screen in the hall at once. It was Ambassador Thexelar who answered it. A hologram of Elena Vasquez appeared in the center of the room. She was no longer wearing her diplomat's robes. She was now in the uniform of a fleet admiral. Her face was calm, maybe even a little sad. "This is Admiral Elena Vasquez of the United Earth Fleet," she said, her voice echoing with authority. "We are aware of the Dreth invasion. We are here to help." "Help?" Seelan's voice was a tiny squeak. "What is this? Where did this fleet come from? You told us you were weak. You said you couldn't even defend your own colonies." Elena looked at him with that same look of pity she'd had months earlier. "We told you nothing, Minister. You told yourselves. You saw our small patrol ships and you assumed that was the best we had. You saw our farmers and our merchants and you decided that was all we were. We never lied to you. For 87 years, we just let you see what you wanted to see." Selen was completely floored. "You hid this kind of power for 87 years? "We did." "But why?" Elena took a deep breath and her voice sounded heavy, filled with ancient pain. "Because we hoped we would never have to use it. Because we were hoping you would accept us as friends. We were afraid that if you saw our true strength, you would fear us instead of respecting us. We wanted to earn your trust the right way, with kindness, with service, by being a good and loyal ally for decades. We wanted you to value us for who we are, not for the size of our weapons." She looked around the silent room, her eyes passing over the faces of the 100 different species who had mocked and belittled humanity for nearly a century. "We were wrong," she said softly. "You never saw our character. You only saw what you thought was our weakness, and you despised us for it. So now you will see our strength. My only hope is that you don't grow to despise us for this too." The hologram flickered, replaced by a terrifying map. An entire armada was bearing down on them, and the Council's last few ships were nothing more than floating wreckage. The only thing standing between the enemy and total galactic domination was the human fleet. "We will engage the Dreth," Elena's voice announced, firm and clear. "But let's be straight about one thing. We're not asking for anything. We're not making demands. We're not doing this because you begged or because you finally apologized or because you decided after all this time to treat us like equals. We're doing this because innocent people are about to be wiped out if we stand by and do nothing." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle across the galaxy. "We're doing this because it's the right thing to do." And with that, the screen went black. The human fleet met the Dreth Armada in the silent, cold void between the stars. On paper, it was a lopsided fight, 10,000 Dreth warships against just 8,000 human vessels. The Dreth commanders were practically laughing. They had just shattered the Council's forces, and they assumed these newcomers would be an even quicker victory. They couldn't have been more mistaken. The entire battle lasted only 4 hours, but in that sliver of time, the fate of the galaxy was completely rewritten. Human weapons sliced through Dreth shields like they were made of paper. Their ships moved with a stunning, coordinated grace that made the Council's most legendary admirals look like clumsy trainees. Every time the Dreth tried to change tactics, the humans were already there, waiting for them. When Dreth reinforcements warped into the system, they were met by a human welcoming committee that was anything but welcoming. From the burning bridge of her flagship, Admiral Thesson could only stare in horror as the Dreth Armada was taken apart, piece by agonizing piece. She had fought in dozens of war, but she had never, in her entire life, seen a slaughter executed with such surgical precision. "They're not just defeating them," her tactical officer stammered, his voice a mix of fear and wonder. "They're performing an operation. They're dismantling an entire military while somehow keeping casualties on both sides unbelievably low." And he was right. The humans weren't just winning. They were winning with an almost impossible level of self-control. They disabled enemy ships whenever possible, instead of blasting them into atoms. They took out engines and weapon systems with pinpoint accuracy, leaving life support untouched. Every single time a Dreth ship offered to surrender, it was accepted in a heartbeat, and the humans would even move to shield their new prisoners from the crossfire. They were fighting a war with compassion. When the smoke finally cleared, a transmission came through from the Dreth High Admiral. His voice was completely broken. "We surrender. We surrender to the humans. We will withdraw from Council space this instant. We will accept any terms you name. Please, in the name of the stars, just make it stop." Elena's voice broadcast across every channel, calm and steady. Your surrender is accepted. Return to your territory. Release every prisoner you have ever taken from this war and any conflict before it. Dismantle your entire offensive military, and you will never again threaten the people of this galaxy, whether they belong to the Council or not. Yes, of course we agree to everything. Then go home, Elena said, her voice softening just a fraction. Rebuild your society around peace, not conquest. We don't hate you. We don't want to see you suffer. This war is over. And just like that, the Dreth turned and fled. Their fearsome armada, the very force that had brought the galaxy to its knees, limped back to its distant empire, broken and defeated. They would never be a threat again. Back in the Grand Assembly Hall, the silence was deafening. The representatives stared at their holographic screens, watching the aftermath of the battle play out. They saw the human fleet, powerful beyond belief, terrifying in its efficiency, and utterly merciful. At long last, Ambassador Thexelar broke the silence. "They saved us," he whispered, his voice thick with disbelief. "After everything we put them through, they actually saved us." "They had no choice," Selin snapped back, though his voice lacked any real conviction. "They live in this galaxy too. What else could they do?" "They could have done anything they wanted," Thexelar replied, turning to face the minister. "They could have let the Dreth burn us to the ground. They could have waited and then conquered what was left for themselves. They could have made us their slaves, just like we treated them like second-class citizens for 87 miserable years. But they had chosen mercy, and that single fact left Selton utterly speechless. Light years away on her command ship, Elena Vasquez gazed out at the peaceful starscape. The battle was over, the galaxy was safe, and humanity had just announced its presence on the cosmic stage in the most dramatic way possible. Admiral Chen Wei stepped up beside her. "The Council is going to be calling any second," he said. "They'll be offering us everything, keys to the kingdom, command of the joint fleet, whatever we want." "I know," she replied softly. "So, what are we going to tell them?" Elena let the question linger in the quiet of the bridge. She thought about her decades of service, the endless disrespect, and the day she'd had enough, placing her badge on the podium and walking away without a word. She thought about the kind of person she hoped to be, and the kind of civilization she prayed humanity could become. "We're going to tell them the truth," she said at last. "We don't want to rule them. We never did. All we ever wanted was to be their partners, their equals. And now we get to build something new, something better, not because they're finally willing to respect us, but because it's the right thing to do." She turned from the view screen and headed for the communications hub. There was so much work to be done. A galaxy needed healing. A future needed building. "We've shown them our strength," she said over her shoulder. "Now, it's time to show them something much more important." "And what's that?" Chen asked. "We're going to show them who we are." In the days following the Great Battle, a deep quiet fell over the galaxy. Ships moved carefully through the wreckage of the biggest war in recorded history. Rescue teams sifted through the debris, saving survivors from both sides. Human medical ships were treating wounded Dreth soldiers right next to the Council's own. Nobody was refused care. Nobody was left to die. On the Dreth homeworld, a civilization founded on 50,000 years of conquest was starting to unravel. Their fleet was gone. Their empire was a ruin. They braced themselves for punishment, for occupation, for enslavement. They expected the humans to do to them exactly what they would have done if the roles were reversed. Instead, they got help. Human freighters arrived, packed with food and medical supplies. Human engineers appeared to help them rebuild their broken cities. Human diplomats came with peace terms that were firm, but shockingly fair. They required disarmament and reform, but they never demanded shame or humiliation. The Dreth High Chancellor met with Admiral Elena Vasquez on his shattered planet. He was an old, weary man who had dedicated his life to a war he had now completely lost. "I don't understand," he confessed. "We tried to destroy your allies. We would have taken everything you hold dear. Why are you showing us this kindness?" Elena looked at the ancient leader, saw his confusion, his fear, and the faint glimmer of hope that this wasn't all some elaborate trick. "Because mercy isn't a weakness," she explained gently. "It's the most difficult kind of strength there is. Any fool can destroy. It takes real courage to build a lasting peace with a former enemy. Your people could be emperors of the galaxy right now. No one could stop you." "We don't want to be emperors. That was never what we were after." "Then what is it you want?" A faint smile touched Elena's lips. "We want the same thing we've always wanted. From the very first day we looked up at the stars. We want friends. We want partners. We want to explore and discover and grow with other civilizations. We want to offer a helping hand when it's needed and be able to ask for one when we're in trouble. That's it. That's the entire plan." The Dreth High Chancellor lowered his head. For the first time in 50,000 years, a leader of the Dreth Empire began to weep. "We will try to become the people you describe," he promised. "We will learn to be better. I can't promise we'll succeed, but thanks to you, we have the chance to try." Rebuilding the Dreth would take generations. It would be a long, slow, and often painful journey. But it would happen. A civilization once defined by war would learn to define itself by something else entirely. Humanity had proven it was possible. Inside the Grand Assembly Hall, the council met to figure out what to do next. The atmosphere in the room was more somber than it had ever been. The very same leaders who had once openly mocked humanity now sat in a state of humbled shock. Minister Celine was the first to rise and speak. His scales seemed to have lost their shine since the battle, and he moved as if he were carrying the weight of all his past mistakes. "I stand before you today to finally admit a truth we have ignored for 87 years. Humanity was never the lesser species we made them out to be. They were guardians, choosing to hide their true strength. They were servants who chose to help others." Imagine getting kicked out of the cool kids club of the galaxy. That's exactly what happened to us. They called humanity too weak, too emotional, and for 87 years they laughed at us. So when a terrifying alien armada showed up to burn their shiny empires to the ground, the very people who mocked us were suddenly begging for a hero. They were on the brink of being totally wiped out. But they weren't. Want to know how the underdogs nobody believed in ended up saving everyone? Stick around, because the answer will surprise you. For decades, we'd asked for nothing more than a seat at the table, to be judged by our character, not by the size of our fleet. They took our kindness for weakness. We'd send them warnings about galactic threats, and they'd file them under hysterical human nonsense. We tried to build bridges, and they built walls. All we ever wanted was to be treated with basic dignity, but our pleas were met with condescending silence. Then the Dreth arrived. They were a nightmare clad in iron, a warrior race that lived for conquest, and they tore through the Council's defenses like paper. The galaxy's most powerful empires, the ones who had called us pathetic, were suddenly losing. Their unbeatable fleets were shattered, their worlds were burning, and their arrogance had turned to pure, primal fear. It was a war they started with their pride, and it was a war they were about to lose completely. Just when their final capital world was about to fall, something incredible happened. A fleet of human ships blinked into existence between the Dreth and the planet. We didn't come with guns blazing for revenge. Instead, we did something they'd never seen before. We protected them. Our ships moved with a strange grace, defending the defenseless, shielding civilian transports, and outsmarting the Dreth with tactics they couldn't predict. It was a small surprise that turned into a giant turning point. After we pushed the Dreth back, the Galactic Council called an emergency session. Broadcast across the entire galaxy, the lead minister, a being who once personally mocked our ambassador, stood before a hologram of our admiral, Elena Vasquez. He admitted they were wrong, that they had failed us, and that our mercy had shown them the error of their ways. And then came the big offer. On behalf of the Galactic Council, he announced, we formally offer humanity leadership of the Council itself. Please, take your rightful place as our leader. The entire galaxy held its breath. This was it, the ultimate victory, the ultimate revenge. The weaklings were now being offered the crown. Elena Vasquez was silent for a long moment, and then, with the entire universe watching, she gave a one-word answer. No. A shockwave of confusion rippled through the chamber. The minister stammered, "No? I don't understand." This was the big reveal, the moment no one saw coming. "Humanity will not rule you," Elena said, her voice calm but firm. "We didn't save you to become your new masters. We saved you because it was the right thing to do. Your problem isn't your leader, it's your system. For 10,000 years, you've built a ladder where everyone tries to claw their way to the top. That's what created this war. I'm not asking for the top spot on your ladder. I'm asking you to kick the ladder over and build a round table instead." She proposed something radical, a true federation, a partnership where every species gets an equal vote no matter how big or small, where you help each other because you're friends, not because of a contract. The idea was so revolutionary it was almost unthinkable. But then the lead minister did something even more shocking. He stepped down from his towering platform, walked across the floor, and in front of the entire galaxy, he bowed his head to the hologram of the human admiral. "I was wrong about humanity," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I will spend the rest of my days trying to earn your forgiveness." Elena offered a kind smile. "Forgiveness isn't something you earn," she replied. "It's a gift, and I'm giving it to you now. Let's build a better future, together." One by one, the other representatives came down from their high seats and stood together on the floor, equals for the first time in millennia. In that moment, the Galactic Federation was born. Years later, in a sun-drenched garden on Earth, an old woman named Elena Vasquez watched her grandchildren play. A news report was talking about Remembrance Day, the holiday marking the war that almost ended everything. Her grandson tugged on her sleeve. "Grandma," he asked, "why did you help them, after they were so mean to you?" Elena pulled the boy into a hug. "Because who we are is a choice we make every day," she said gently. "They chose to be arrogant. We chose to be helpers. Being angry is like holding a hot coal. You're the only one who gets burned. But forgiveness is like a warm fire that makes everyone feel better. And I decided a long time ago," she whispered, looking up at the sky full of starships flying in peace, "that I'd rather be warm, dull,